Hello and welcome to my beginner tutorial on modeling and rendering in 3ds Max. Today we're going to be modeling a high poly flashlight and rendering it out in mental ray using the daylight system and some volumetric lighting effects, as well as the arch and design materials that are present in mental ray. So I'd first like to begin by talking about the two ways that we can go about this and why each is important and why you should, consider picking each. So the first one is this model right here, which I actually made all one mesh. And this would be more along the lines of something that you'd want to do if you were not making a game asset, or this was to be used in a film or something like that, where it's actually going to be interacted with and it doesn't have a poly requirement. The second type is what you do if you're making a normal map, and that, well, you can do either or either, but this one is much faster and a much more efficient method of creating normal maps for your low poly models. And basically what this is it utilizes what's called a floater. As you can see, it's a separate piece of geometry that floats above the base object here. So the reason that you would want to use something such as a floater is you can see here our low poly is this model right here. It's about 100, it's probably less than 100 polygons. This is our high poly, or rather these two models are. And basically what we'd be doing is baking into a normal map this information of the high poly into the low poly. And you get something along the lines of this right here, where this is actually the in-game asset. And this is for a test. I was considering how I should execute this tutorial, and you can see how even though this is actually a hard edge, that the normal map makes the light affect the edges differently, and it also pretends that there is in fact a bump here when there isn't. And this would be ideal if you were making a game asset, which is not what we'll be doing in this tutorial. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're high poly modeling. So without further ado, let's get into it. And I'm going to just clear my slate here. So as you can see, when you start with 3ds Max, you're going to start with these four windows. So what we're going to want to do is go into our left viewport, press Alt-W to full screen it, and we're going to take a plane, draw it out, right-click to stop making a plane, press F3 on our keyboard, and then G to remove a grid. As you can see, we now have, if you press G, you can turn the grid on. We have a plane perpendicular to the grid at 90 degrees. So let's quickly move this back pressing W on our keyboard to use the move tool. And we're going to want to move it up. Just kind of get it on the same level as that grid there, just to make things a little bit easier on us. Press M on your keyboard, and we are going to open the material editor, drag a standard out from over here from the materials list, right click it, we'll call this reference image. So we're going to take this diffuse color, click on it, drag it out, click bitmap, navigate to your files or your project files, and for this tutorial we're going to use this file, which is, we're going to use this file right here, and it will be included in your project files, which are in the description, and will include the texture for the ground when we render it out, as well as all the reference images you need to complete your model. So we're going to, with this selected and all this set up, click over here to show shaded material and viewport, and then drag it out. And as you can see, we now have a reference image. You press L on your keyboard and press G to turn off that grid. You can see now that we can begin modeling after we scale this up to make it look right. There's quite a few ways to make it exactly right if you wanted to. In this case, it's pretty easy to tell just by looking at the curvature of these lights, but you could go and check out the resolution of the image file, and you could rename, or you could set the length and width and use those as pixels from the image file, and it would be exact. But this is good enough, and I can tell that it's very close. So what we're going to do now is begin drawing out this flashlight. So let's go to our create panel over here on the right. Take a cylinder, and let's click and drag it until we make a cylinder that's about the width of this flashlight. Now you can see that you can't really tell if it's going forward or back because we're in our orthographic left viewport. So you can press P on your keyboard, or just do it in your left view and know that you're dragging it out. Click and right click. And you can see that we actually do have a shape. So now we're going to make this we're going to rotate this 90 degrees. So we're going to turn on our angle snaps, or press A on our keyboard, and it'll make it so everything, or when we rotate, it goes up by 5 degrees. And we go to 90, and as you can see, it is 100% parallel. So let's go back in our left viewport by pressing L. We're going to use our move tool and position this down here at the bottom and kind of line it up. Let's go over here before we continue on, because we're getting this shadowing right here, and that is not something that we want. It's distracting and it just gets in the way of modeling. So we're going to click realistic, turn that to shaded, and now that is gone. So now you can see that we want to be able to kind of see what's going on in here, and this material is blocking our view. So we can press Alt X to go into X-ray mode, and you can see that it makes the material translucent. So you can also press Alt X to get that back. Oftentimes I actually prefer to use the material editor and then get a standard material, apply it to my selection, double click and open it. As you can see in 2013, this dotted line signifies which one has its parameters open, and then taking the opacity all the way down to about like 6 or less, just depending on what I'm doing. So as you can see now, it's much less in the way. So before we go on and we continue modeling, let's just address a few of the issues that we can see right away. And you don't have to actually do this if you don't want to. You can press Alt X or not even do it at all. So what we're going to do is, you can see that we have a bunch of lines on this grid that are going to be irritating when we're modeling. So just go into the modifier panel with your plane selected, drag the length and width segments down to 1, and that will remove them. To remove these brackets up here, we're going to press J on our keyboard. And we also, on our cylinder, we want to remove some of these height segments. So let's drag these down to 0, or 1 rather. Now pressing Alt X or using a translucent material, go into your left viewport. We're going to make this an editable poly, so right click the material, or right click convert to editable poly, or right click convert to editable poly. After you've converted it, press 1 on your keyboard, or use the vertex subtool selection here, or by expanding the editable poly, you can click vertex, and you can click and drag and select your vertices. Drag them down to here where the flashlight body is terminated and starts going into this unscrewable or twist off top. Then you can see here that there's also another twist off at the bottom, so we're going to drag these polys up and we'll deal with this later. One thing I would like to talk about before we go on is we're not going to be modeling the details in this grip or up here. This is more about getting a basic understanding of how high poly modeling works, rather than going about adding all these details, because there's a lot of ways we could do them. We could model it. This type of thing would be it'd be a lot easier just to either just apply this as a normal map or make a diamond shaped mesh with 3ds Max, but that's not something we're going to be doing today. So now let's press P on our keyboard to go in our perspective view, and we are going to use face selection or polygon selection mode. And we are going to extrude this out to about the end of where this is to get that little bit, the little rounded out part. Press OK. 10 centimeters is good. And we're going to bevel this now. Remember, you can click bevel here. I prefer to use this little box because it allows me to tweak it a little bit more than if I were to just use this tool. I don't like using this really. I prefer to use just the numeric way of doing everything. So you're going to make your first segment, press apply and continue, and then make a second segment. Now we're going to round this off, so press delete on your keyboard with this bottom poly selected. We're going to finish this off rather. Click on one of these edges here, and then hold down shift and click another edge. And now we have all of those edges selected. We're going to hold down Alt on our keyboard and click on these two edges that are across from each other. And then down here in our edit edges, we're going to click bridge. And this is actually really important later on when we're making our high poly, when we finally turbo smooth this. And let me show you why. If we turbo smooth it now, you can see that it looks very clean. I mean, there's maybe a little bit of issue there, but let's say we were going to leave it how it was. You turbo smooth it, you get some hardcore flowering right there, and it's not an efficient way to go about doing things. So let me go back to where I was. So again, Alt, and bridge. And then we're just going to call that bottom good for now. So let's get up here and start making the final top part. And then we'll start adding details like this little button here. And then we'll also make these little divots where it would normally unscrew, and then this divot as well. Let's just finish off the basic shapes. So one really important thing to do is to always make sure you get your basic shapes proportions down before you start adding detail, because if you start adding detail and you decide you want to change something later, it just is a total pain. So we're not going to have that happen to us. So what we want to do, if we observe this closely, we notice that it's actually a really hard edge because it's two separate objects. So what we're going to do is we are going to still model it out using this main shape, and then we'll separate them later, and then we'll move it back a little bit to give it that nice hard edge, because then it'll be two separate objects. So press P on your keyboard and delete this face, and then press 3 or use border selection, and with that selected, press L and hold down shift. With your move tool, click and drag on the y-axis to about here. It's really important that we try to fill out this shape right here. So I mean, yeah, I could go up here and then make it look like this, but if I did that, it would just look absurd, and it's not logical. If we do it like this, like I'm about to show you, we get it. We start dragging it out. We get a much nicer shape. So let me walk you through this real quick. One thing before we get started that's important to know is that unless you have the select and uniform scale on, you will get when you're in an orthographic view such as this, you could get a very odd looking scale, and that's not what we want. We want it to stay perfectly circular. Make sure you're clicking right here in this middle part, so that way not here, not here, not here, here. That way it's a uniform scale and it's perfectly round. So back in your left view, we're going to first, with our move tool, go up about halfway on this little curve right here, and then press R on your keyboard or click the select and uniform scale and scale it out till it's even with your reference image. press W on your keyboard, drag it out by holding Shift. Remember, you're holding Shift and clicking and dragging, and then getting that even, and then pressing W, clicking and dragging. And then now you can see that we have our basic shape down. We just have to finish making the inside, and then we're going to separate them. So let's get into making the inside. So what you're going to do is press R on your keyboard, and let's quickly look at some of our reference images before we begin. As you can see, it has an edge here, and it's more rounded than it is flat, so it's never going to be completely flat. It will be in the low poly model, or what's called a control mesh, and we'll go into that later. And then you can see it kind of curves in here, and then it curves in even more as the glass is here. So we're going to first just get this shape in here before we go down, and then we'll close it all up and add a light bulb. So with your scale tool selected and this ring, hold Shift, and within this middle part right here, click and drag inwards, and then press W to use your move tool, or alternately move and select, or select and move. Shift and drag down, just like so. Without holding down Shift, use your scale tool, drag it in, kind of like you see in that reference image. And then we're going to actually want to scale outwards. Press F3 to go in your wireframe view, and you can see what we're actually doing. Press W and Shift and drag down. And this is the inside. And we're going to scale that in. So now we have a little separation where that glass is going to be. And we'll get to that in a minute. So kind of like at the bottom of the flashlight, what we're going to want to do is go into edge selection mode and alt click and bridge it. It's a very useful tool that I recently learned, and it makes life really easy. So we've got the base mesh of our model done, but you can see now if we were to turbo smooth this, it just looks awful. It doesn't make any sense at all. So we're going to remedy that and get this thing going. So what you're going to want to do next, before we get any farther, is we're going to want to use the Swift Loop tool up here in our graphite modeling tools. If it's not showing, hit this little arrow right here, and then put a little control loop there. Using face selection, select all of these faces, hitting control and selecting, and then click inset. And we'll call this good right here. And this way, now when we turbo smooth that part, it's nice and controlled, and it looks it's a nice hard edge, but it's also got some rounded corners like you'd see in real life. Okay, next we're going to finish adding all of our loops just to get this nice and ready to smooth. So add a loop under here. As you can see, it's going to help define that shape in there and keep it from distorting. Then let's add one up here, because it's kind of a hard edge if you look at the reference image. Let's check it out from our smooth. It's not bad. And then let's add one right here, here, and here. And check that out. We got a nice smooth going on. If we turn up our iterations to 3 on our turbo smooth modifier, you can see that it's a lot nicer looking than if it's at iteration 1 or 2, but it's also a higher polygon count. So let's just finish smoothing this out. If you've done my high poly tutorial, you understand all of what we're doing. And then remember I said we're going to separate that, so let's do that next. So go into your left view, turn on polygon mode, and click and drag this entire thing right here. And you will actually have all of these polygons selected. Click left, and we are going to go down here to detach in our polygon selection mode. Let's name this flashlight top. Then unselect polygon mode and select your top. As you can see, it's no longer part of the base anymore. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to isolate this selection by right-clicking Isolate Selection. This is 3ds Max 2013. If you do it in 2012, the Isolate Selection brings up a little dialog box. And if you want to exit, you just exit. So back in 2013, we're going to press 3 on our keyboard and select this edge. Just like we did before, press R and click and drag this in a little bit. And then we'll also want to scale this out just a little bit. Simply because we don't want it to be flush with this part of the model. So now with this selected, let's add one more little loop right here. And then we can call the top part done for now. If you smooth that out, you can see that it looks decent enough. This edge actually is a little bit sharp. Yeah, I'm going to just remove this little loop right there. That looks a lot better. One thing that I do to check and see how my material is going to look is I press M on my keyboard and I make a standard material. I like to make it very dark. And then I turn up my specular level. That way it allows me to see what the high poly really looks like as well as the edges. I usually have a specular level about 60. So that's personally what I prefer to do, and I'd recommend it as well. In fact, let's go ahead and apply that to all of these objects. So remember, just standard material, dark color, and a high specular level, about 60. It allows you to see what the mesh looks like smooth a little bit better, and if you're doing a good job at it or not. So let's add a little bit more detail up here since we've got the basic shape down. As you can see, really the only detail that I'd like to add is this little bump where you can unscrew and replace the bulb. So let's add 3 edge loops right here. After you create this edge loop right here, if at any time you can't see your little X, Y, and Z, your gizmo, press X on your keyboard. And that'll toggle its visibility. Another interesting thing that took me a while to figure out and that was extremely helpful was pressing Z will allow you to no longer be slow when you're zooming in. As you can see, the farther you zoom in, the harder it is to actually scroll and move forward. Pressing Z fixes that. And I oftentimes will click Shift, which toggles my selection lock. So if you can't select anything, just press Shift. And that should help you. So now, going back to the lesson, if you have this middle line selected, scale that in. Click on these vertices right here. Click the one next to it with Shift click, and it'll select that ring. Same down here, Shift click, or click Shift. And then in the Z axis, tighten that up a little bit. We're going to go back into edge mode by pressing 2. Click Shift Swift Loop. And we're going to add some edge loops there to keep this shape minimalized. If you smooth it, you can see that now we've got a nice little flashlight divot. Let's go down here and we're going to do the same thing and finish up this bottom part. And then we're gonna build that little button into it, and we can call the flashlight good and get started on our render. So using the Swift Loop tool, let's define this edge right here. As you can see, it's kind of hard and then it smooths out, so we don't really need to worry about having anything else here. Just put something right here because it's the bottom. Let's make it not so tight. Make it a little bit looser of an edge. Press 4 and select these polygons, and just like we did at the top, inset these a little bit and click OK. And then now when we smooth it, looks quite well. Things are starting to shape up. Let's just do like we did at the top. We're going to add in a little divot here, so delete your turbo smooth. We'll just reuse this geometry right here. If we add 5 loops, or 5 loops, then we can skip doing those extra 2 later. But we do have to select more vertices. Just like we did on the top, on the z-axis, scale them in. Whoops, I forgot to select this whole loop. And it didn't want to select the loop correctly. So what we're going to do is go in our left view and just select these by holding Control and select. Same as up here. And scale that inwards. And then now we've got a nice tight gap that when smoothed looks quite well. Okay, let's get into our final piece for this high poly flashlight, and then we'll start getting into rendering. So press left on your viewport, press Alt X, and now we're going to start breaking in this geometry. So turn off all your turbo smooth modifiers on this, and we are going to make sure you're not in wireframe mode and you're in shaded mode. With your base selected, scroll in, get your cut tool. I'd say this is the middle. Sadly, we did this with not enough curves, but it's okay. We didn't have the right number of sides to do it perfectly in the middle, but that's okay. That's why we have the rotate tool. So just cut out a basic shape. It actually doesn't have to conform to this whole thing. This is good enough for our purposes. And really that's all you have to do in this first part. So now, once you have these 2 little lines drawn that basically line out this shape in the left viewport, you're going to want to click on this line right here. The reason you want to do this is going to be the line that we're going to use a symmetry modifier on, so that these are exactly the same on this side as this side. And it'll just make things a lot easier. Actually, you know what? Since we already drew those lines down there, I won't go into detail, but let's just draw this out manually. Makes things a lot easier. Try to make them as even as possible with the other side. And now we just need to turn these into quads, or rather finish up our quads. Yeah, we need to turn them into quads. So use the edge loop tool and make it so these loops go about the same place that this is. Take your cut tool and just finish up that line, and finish up that line. And so you click, click, right click, 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 right click. Next thing you want to do is press 4 on your keyboard, and with those 2 selected, click Inset, and we're going to want to drag them in. And you see this is starting to take shape. You're probably wondering, I wonder why it's, it's shaped oddly. Well, when you smooth it, it won't be. It'll look normal when it's smooth. So take your Inset again, and do this, and we're going to use it to help define that shape. And then we're going to use our swift loop tool, make an edge loop here. And as you can see, normally you'd want to make a loop around the outside, but this time you can't do that with an edge loop tool. So get your cut tool and cut it manually. And then we'll fix the topology in a few minutes. So let's just smooth it out really quick and see how this looks. And don't worry about it being perfect. That's not the point. It's got quite a few issues here, and those are most likely caused by the fact that, well, one, we're not building it in very well, but that and these little tries right here. We want to get rid of these triangles. So we're gonna use the target weld, click one vertice, weld it to the next, click one vertice, weld it to the next, click one, weld it, click one, weld it. Then with that done, take and reposition these so it's a little bit nicer. And then smooth it out, see how it looks. It's not great, but it's a little bit better. It's good enough for a tutorial. So the next thing we want to do, I want to address right now that there's some pinching, and that's what this is. And that's not something that's desirable to have on a model, but in this case, since it's just a basic tutorial, it's totally fine. So we're going to want to go back in our create panel now, since we've got all this defined, and we're going to want to add a sphere. Using auto grid, we can draw right into the middle here, making our button. So now that we've got that drawn, under this hemisphere, under the modifier panel with the sphere selected, do 0.5, and now it cuts that sphere in half. And what we're going to want to do is turn the sides down to about 12. Convert this to an editable poly, and right-click Isolate Selection. Now, with this isolated, obviously we want to get rid of these bottom faces. Well, actually, you know what? In this case, it will work just fine. We're going to leave these as they are. Well, there's flowering at the top, but, that's not the point of this tutorial right now. Let's apply the same material by pressing M on our keyboard that we applied to everything else. And let's shrink this flat, make it a little bit flatter, just like the button is. Unisolate the selection and pull it back so it's penetrating the geometry. Maybe pull it out just a little bit more. Center it up. And click Turbo Smooth. You can click Turbo Smooth by going through here. Find Turbo Smooth. Press F4 to turn on and off edge faces. Smooth this out as well. This isn't a great model, but again, that's not the point of the tutorial at all. The point of this tutorial is to teach you the basics of modeling. Line that how you like it. If you feel like making it shaped a little bit differently, go for it. It's your model, do what you want. Okay, we have the basics of our model completed. We could add a flashlight up here. You know what? Actually, let's add a light. Let's add a light. So let's just make it quickly, since we don't want to take a lot of time on this. We're already 33 minutes in, so with auto grid selected, make a sphere. Drag it, click it, and then using Z with the scale tool, make this super ugly shape. Edit that poly, and turbo smooth it and assign a material. In this case, we're going to end up changing the material later anyway. One last thing to do, and that is to make a cylinder. We're going to make it actually right here, and this is going to be the glass that will be penetrated by our lighting. So let's drag out a quick cylinder. Under the modifier panel, make it an editable poly. Pressing 4, delete these faces so you're left with one face. And we're going to want to bring this up into our model. Make sure it's right underneath this lip, just like in the reference images. You can see it's just right underneath that lip. Okay, that looks good. Okay, let's quickly just group this whole thing right here. Actually, you know what, let's not. Let's leave it how it is. Delete your reference image, so click your reference image and click delete. Now let's start applying materials before we get any further, and then we'll group the whole thing and call it good. So let's click on all these metal parts right here. This is going to be rubber, this is going to be glass, and that little guy in there is going to be glass as well. So let's right click, isolate selection. So we just have the metal parts of our flashlight. Press M on your keyboard. With your material editor open, let's make a new view. So we're going to call this flashlight materials. We're going to make sure we change our render to mental ray so we can get the mental ray materials. So click render setup, assign renderer, and then your assign renderer may be at the bottom. I prefer mine at the top. So we're going to do default scanline renderer, NVIDIA mental ray. It's just mental ray, I believe, in 2012 and below, but NVIDIA mental ray and iRay in 2013. So with that renderer selected, you can now see that we have the mental ray materials such as arch and design, which is what we're going to be using for a lot of our objects. So click the arch and design material. We're going to want to drag this out and apply it to our objects or our selection. And then we want to go into these templates, and we're going to make it, let's quickly look at this. It's somewhat reflective. It's very reflective, but it's also not like a mirror. So let's we'll use the glazed ceramic, and then we'll up the glossiness to about 0.6. Change the color, make it much darker. We'll probably want to make this one just make it any color you want. I'm gonna make mine blue. Not for any particular reason, it just what I think that we should do in this case. Because it's going to be a nighttime scene, and having it be completely black is, I don't know what it'll turn out like. So we're just going to be blue to stay on the safe side. Actually, since it's a night scene, let's just go ahead and make whatever color you want. Just don't make it black. You can try making it black. It's up to you. Let's see. We're going to call this good for now. We'll probably end up changing it later. Just to be neat, let's name this flashlight metal. Now we're going to want to drag out, or let's unisolate the selection. And pressing F4, I'm going to have my we're going to hide these right here. Select these two, and we're going to drag out an arch and design material. We're going to call this glass. Drag it to these two, assign to selection, and under material properties, with this selected, go down to glass, physical, and then when you render that out, you'll definitely be able to tell that this is physicalized glass. We're going to want to change the color to just a little bit brighter. Okay. Next thing we're going to want to do is finish up this little guy here, which is going to be rubber. So again, arch and design. These are really good materials for quickly texturing objects, and use the rubber preset. And now it's much more matte. So unhide all, right click unhide all, and we've got ourselves a high poly flashlight that is ready to be included in a scene. So let's start setting up that scene. The first thing I'd like to do before we lay out our entire scene is I'd like to group this, so that way all of this can be selected as one. So with all these objects selected, go up to Group, click Group, name it Flashlight, hit Enter or OK, and now when we click it, it selects the entire thing and it can be moved around. So what we're going to do first is we're going to make a plane that will be used as the ground. We're going to drag it out about this big. Okay, that looks good. We're going to drag out a box and we're going to make it into a wall. And let's move this flashlight over here next to our wall. Now remember, the whole goal of this tutorial isn't to make amazing renders, but it's to get you introduced to the tools so you can start learning and building a foundation for what you want to learn. So right now we want to make it so it looks like it's actually resting on the ground, and if we were to rotate it, it doesn't rotate quite how we want it to. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to want to press A to turn off our angle snaps, rotate it, move it down till both penetrate at the same time, and then put it up just a little bit. And it looks like it's actually resting on the ground. But now that we've rotated it again, just to kind of show it off a little bit better, we have to reset it. So looks good. Let's move this wall. Let's rotate it to about there. Let's actually position this behind the flashlight. Let's start setting up how we want our scene to be. So just try and find an angle that you like. I prefer this. Now with this set up, press Control C and you'll make your first camera. Up here it'll tell you you now have a camera viewport. So press P on your keyboard to go into perspective. You can now see how that is all set up. So let's start texturing these little guys right here, or this floor and this wall. So let's press M on our keyboard. And now that we have a flashlight, we're going to call this World. Let's just drag out a standard material, apply it to the ground, drag out the diffuse, and we're going to find a map. I'm going to include this in your tutorial as well, or in your project files rather. Turn that on. Now you can see if we're going to go in our thing, it's very pixelated, so we're going to tile it. We'll do about a tile of 8. See how that looks? It could be better. We'll do 10. 15. Let's try that. It's probably extreme, but that'll work. We're going to drag this little nub right here, put it in the bump, so that way there's depth to this concrete. Double click your standard material now that we have our bump map and our diffuse set up. Go to Maps. We're going to turn our bump scale up to about 40, just to make it a little bit deeper. So let's render out a quick look at it. It's going to look pretty terrible. Actually, it looks awful. As you can see, there's no lighting whatsoever. It's just a terrible render, but that's not the point. We're just going to check out how it looks. Let's quickly set up our render size to 720. So on the output size, go HDTV, turn it to 720. I prefer 1080 for my final render, but 720 for my preview renders. And that way we can get the aspect ratio and place it in our scene. Depending on the power of your computer, this may take a while. I have a hex core 3930K at 4.5 gigahertz, and that definitely will make this go a little bit faster than most people's computers, but just be patient. I recommend rendering out some drafts before you decide to do your final render every time, because then you don't want to do your final render and be like, oh no, well this looks awful and I have to redo it. So I don't really like how that's looking. I wanna change this up a little bit and mess with my scene, get a better look. Let's kind of zoom in on that flashlight more. So we're gonna go in our perspective view, click on our camera, go to the modifier panel, and then press C to go back to our camera. Or you can alternately go to your camera by selecting it under cameras. We're gonna change our zoom up a little bit, make it a little bit more close. I want to rotate this like that. Remember to save your progress. We'll call this flashlight because we want to be super creative. You never want to be too creative. Then, what would be the point? Press P on your keyboard, and we're gonna start lighting this scene. Actually, you know what? Wait, let's finish texturing. So give me a second, and I'm going to find a good material to place on this wall. And I think that for the wall, what we're going to do, and I've included it in your project files as well, is so we're going to drag out a standard material, apply it to our box, diffuse color, bitmap, use this free rock texture. It'll probably just be called wall texture when I upload the project files. Put it in the bump as well, double click it, and just like the last one, make it 5 this time, and then hit apply up here in this corner, and we'll do a quick render. It's not amazing, but that's not the point of this tutorial. So we're gonna now add some lighting to this, so press P on your keyboard. Your scene should look somewhat like this. It really depends on how you want to set it up. Generally you want to make sure your composition is good. Use good angles. I would study photography, especially if you want to get into lighting and rendering and, well, just really anything like that. You want to learn about things like the rule of thirds. For example, I don't want to have everything like right here in the middle. That just is unappealing. It doesn't lead the eye anywhere. I plan to have something up there so this line will lead the eye this way. It's not really a great scene, but just think about it when you're making future scenes. The rule of thirds, and for example this one, there's a sun here, nothing here, but this is leading your eye to the sun. And in that way, it makes it an interesting photograph or really a render. It's not really anything special, but you understand the point. Try to think about your composition when you're making something. So let's quickly drag out a daylight system. So go up here to create systems, daylight system. Do you want to create a daylight system? Do you want to change the exposure values? Yes. So click and drag right about here. This little compass, and then this guy will go up. And click, right click. And if we were to do a test render, you would already have some lighting set up. And it already is starting to look nice, but it's definitely not close to where it needs to be. You can see that there's much better lighting, and there's actually shadows in this case. But it's very far from done. So let's press P on our keyboard if you're in the camera again. And let's take this daylight, and we're going to change the sunlight to mental ray sun, and the skylight to mental ray sky. Do you want to create a mental ray sky? Do you want to add a physical sky? Yes. Now press C, render that out. You can see that we now have a daylight, but this is a night scene, so we're going to do that. We're going to fix that up a little bit, make it a little bit more night, and then we're going to add some illumination over here. And if you'd like, you can do extra materials. I will for the final render. And we're going to do that right now. So the sun position right now is set to usually about 12 o'clock, or 12 if you're in Europe, 1200 hours, or noon. So let's change that down to, let's make it about 4 hours. Well, let's make it 5 a.m. Sun's just coming up. Well, at least that's how it would look from here. And then we're going to change our north direction so that it's in our field of view. Right there. Now let's do a render, test render. And you see we get that really subtle light coming from over here, or coming from the sun. It's nothing amazing, but that's the whole point of this tutorial. I think I'm going to go ahead and make a part 2 about finishing up this scene, or not necessarily finishing it up, but adding a little bit more. I may include it in this tutorial. We'll just see how this goes. We're already at 51 minutes. So what we're going to want to do is go to our lights in the Create panel, go down to Standard and Free Spot. Let's, using Auto Grid, place it right here. Whoops, we don't want to use that one. We want to use Free Spot. I used Free Direct. I apologize. So I had to play around a little bit, and I was having some issues with some of the lighting objects, and also having them interact with the glass. So I had to get rid of that. So I'm going to now show you how we can replace that, and how we're also going to finish something that we actually did forget to do, which is add the reflective part. As you can see inside this flashlight, we're going to do that. So what I want you to do is select this as a group, and then when you do that, click ungroup, and then find that light bulb and that piece that we had here, and delete those. So you should have something like this. We're going to take this part of the flashlight, take the top part, remove this turbo smooth modifier, press 4 on your keyboard under editable poly, press 4, and control shift click to select all of those. And then what we're going to do is go over here, make a new arch and design material, and drag it onto those selected polygons. You'll see now that those are the only polygons with it. We don't have to worry about the ones in the back. They won't be visible in the render. If you'd like to, you can do it anyway. And we're going to turn this to, let's just turn it to chrome, and then make the reflectivity slight. I'll leave it at 100 and turn the glossiness down. And then we'll make it a little bit grayer. And that should look good. So now, and then reapply that turbo smooth. And actually isolate this selection. Remember to get out of your camera mode. And we're going to go in here, and we need to apply that material to these rings. So shift click those, go back to your material editor, and click assign to selection. And now you'll see once it's ready and smooth, we won't have that issue we were just having. Okay, unisolate, press C, do a test render. There we go. It's nice and reflective like we'd like. Okay. As you can see, I have these little lights over here. Those aren't going to be there. So I'm just going to use them for reference in case I forget how I set them up. So the first one we're going to want to drag out is this first spotlight. So we're going to go to Standard, Free Spot, and click here. Drag it up. Pressing E, we're going to rotate it. Get it so it would be like the light coming out of the camera, the flashlight. Try to line it up. Right about. That looks good. So let's go back and make sure we've got it right. Okay. In our modifier panel, we're going to change the multiplier to 80,000. So, whoops, 80,000. We're going to change the light type, make sure it's on spot. Turn on shadows, make them be ray traced. We're going to go to down to spotlight parameters. Let's turn this hotspot / beam up to here, and then turn it down. Actually, let's make the fall off field a little bit tighter, about 110. We'll like this 110 and 40. I'm going to do a quick test render. So you can see that soft shadowing right there. It's looking much better. But we still need a little light bulb, and that's what this next light we're going to place in is going to be. So we would be doing volumetric effects, like I said in the start of the lesson, but I've been having some issues with Mental Ray, rendering those out. I know I can get it to work in V-Ray fairly simply, but we'll just have to make do. So go back to the Create panel, and go to Photometric, and pull out a free light, drag and drop it with auto grid on. We're gonna go and place this inside of here. Pressing Z, you can go and zoom in on the object. We just want to make it right in the middle. Let's go to our modifier panel, and we'll adjust this a little bit. Let's take the shape right here on the area and shape. No, sorry, yes, from emit from light shape. So we're going to make this a sphere, and then we're going to scale it into the shape of a light bulb, or closer to the light bulb of a flashlight. Kind of just decide on how much you want to show. In my case, we only want a little bit to show. And then what we're going to do is we're going to want to turn on shadows. So we'll turn on ray trace shadows. If it's not set to ray traced, set it to ray traced. And then we're going to want to do rendering, render light shape visible. Then we'll do another test render. And we should be able to see a little light. That's looking a lot better. So that's looking good for our test render. I'm going to clean up my scene a little bit and delete these other lights over here. This is what our scene looks like. So now that we've got this part done, I think it's time to add a little bit more to the scene to make it a little more exciting. You don't have to. If you don't want to, you can call it off right now. Be like, hey, I've learned what I want to learn. That's fine. I'm probably going to add a little tiny light up here, have it projecting down as a spotlight, and then I'm probably going to have some little metal brackets over here, and nothing too complicated or special. So I'm just going to go ahead and model those. At this point though, you should have your finished product. If you'd like to go ahead and make it a little bit nicer looking, or stylize your scene, I guess, a little bit more, go for it. There's really nothing holding you back. I mean, yeah, just go for it. Do whatever you want. But hopefully right now you've learned a little bit about rendering, setting up lighting, using materials, and I just hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. And if you have, at this point, like, favorite, and comment. If you think I could have done this better, or there's anything you'd like to see done next, let me know. This tutorial was a request, and that's why I did it. So if there's anything you'd like to learn, just send me a message or comment below the video. Remember, The project files are always going to be in the description, and my goal is to teach you 3ds Max, CryEngine, Photoshop, UDK, anything else you want to know. So just ask. After Effects. If you're not finished with this part and you'd like to follow and watch me do a little bit more, I'm going to do it in another video, and I will be posting it as part 2, and I'll see you in that video. Bye.